The 2024 Republican field is about to get a lot bigger as candidates line up to take down Joe Biden. Tim Scott is officially throwing his hat in the ring today after filing paperwork. Chris Christie says he could announce in the coming days, and Mike Pence's allies are launching a super PAC. But all eyes are on Ron DeSantis. The Florida governor is expected to officially get into the race next week, and he is giving his biggest tease yet.
He just completed what I would say is the boldest and most far-reaching agenda that we've seen in the modern history of the Republican Party. If you look at what we've been able to accomplish, there is something in there for anybody in terms of the issues that we tackled. And at the end of the day, what our country needs to be about is this idea that it really doesn't matter where you start from, that people have an opportunity to do big things in this country, and that's been true historically, and we need to make sure it's true again.
Stay tuned, man. Stay tuned. I can't tip the hat, so.
DeSantis also reportedly telling donors that he is the only Republican who can beat President Biden. But right now in the polls, former President Donald Trump is the frontrunner by a big margin. And while the Republican race is buzzing, Democrats are stuck with bumbling Joe Biden. The president has rock-bottom approval ratings, and voters in his own party want him to step aside. But like always, the media is doing their best to hype up how great Joe is.
Anyone looking at Joe Biden and seeing what he does in a day, I mean, I know you would be exhausted if you had a schedule and probably would take some days off, or I would. They show up at everything. They give their time. And, I mean, it's part of his kindness. It's part of his political instincts. And that's going to be something that they really want to look at as the campaign heats up.
You know, isn't it amazing, Katie, how wonderful Joe Biden is? I mean, how they're gushing about his energy and his brutal schedule. And I think there's a quote where she says something like, he shows up everywhere. But he didn't show up in Palestine and a whole bunch of other places.
He's been MIA for the most part before he went to Japan. The press can't get a hold of him. That's a strategy the Biden campaign used last time, and it seems like they're going to try and use it this time and lean more on their campaign and structure and infrastructure outside of D.C. to really get him over the finish line. But when it comes to, the Republican side, President Trump is about to get a lot more challengers. Ron DeSantis has been his #1 target. He's tried to prevent him from getting in the race. DeSantis seems like he's going to run on his record in Florida, which has been a good one. President Trump has been relying heavily on his record as president, which has also been one of success. And it's interesting to see the media pointing out that Joe Biden has been so successful. When you compare the approval numbers of Joe Biden at this point in his presidency, it's lower than it was for President Trump. Now, when DeSantis says that he's the only one who can beat Joe Biden, I'm not sure that's necessarily true. I think there's a big difference between candidates and campaign strategy, and you have to have both. And there's the reality of the electoral map, which is how are Republicans going to win in places that they've lost last time around, which Arizona, Pennsylvania. President Trump won Michigan and Wisconsin in 2016, wasn't able to keep those in his winning column last time around. How do Republicans get that back? Georgia, being a state that generally votes Republican as a Republican governor, unable to hold on to that. So, candidates matter, but the infrastructure and campaign strategy matter a whole lot, too. And we'll see how these campaigns approach that as well.
Lawrence, 49% of Republicans picked Trump, while 21% picked DeSantis. Real Clear Politics has 56-19. Mm-hmm. So the question is, if DeSantis says, he's one of three, Trump, Biden, and himself, I mean, where do the Republicans go?
Real sanctimonious, right? I'm the only one. When Donald Trump gave him that name, I was wondering, where was he going with that? But there's been several occasions where DeSantis has hit his chest in a way that screams sanctimony. I don't know about, strippers and I don't know. It's very he never takes him on directly. He does it from the side. Look, I'll say this. I think the former president is in a better position today than he was months ago. When you have all these reports coming out and all these allegations that the media made for years, and then you find out that the man was set up the entire time. I mean, you had Jonas Spielberg, whatever his name is, that used to work here at Fox, that said Donald Trump brought all of this on himself. I may have been wrong about this one, and James Comey, in my book at the time, had more credibility. I don't think that's going to fly with American voters. And, you know, the Democrats are right about something. Republicans do shop at Walmart. You know about Walmart? Walmart always has a great deal. You get great value. But they don't like great value in their candidates. They want the real guy. And so I think when people see DeSantis, it's Trump light. And why go light when you can get the real guy? I think he needs to cool his chops a little bit. You're going to have to earn this nomination. And as someone that travels all around the country, there is not a bigger crowd than for Donald Trump.
There's no question. Jessica, you know, the black voter is super important, and 92% of black voters backed Joe in 2020. Now, what we've been seeing recently is that Joe Biden is losing minorities. He's losing the black vote. How is this going to play out? And will Tim Scott, you think, have for any advantage to the Republicans?
Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week. The Washington Post poll, which had the most kind of dire implications for Joe Biden's minority support, appears to be an outlier. There have been several polls that have come out since then. I don't think anyone in their right mind thinks that there's going to be a tidal wave of black voters leaving the Democratic Party to go for Trump. But that doesn't mean that he couldn't pick off another 1 or 2%. He got 12% of the vote in 2020, which is the biggest achievement for a Republican candidate. He also gets more support from Latino voters than people do. And Joe Biden has been softer with Latino voters than Hillary Clinton was. And even
black males.
Well, I include them in the black vote.
There's a big contingent of black males, as well as the black voters that will just stay at home.
I gave him credit for that. I do not think that this is going to turn into a scenario that the Republicans want, where suddenly things are tilted on their heads. But he does offer, it's an uncanny candidacy, right? And it has been from the start in 2016. And so you can get people who you wouldn't expect to support you with that kind of campaign. Ron DeSantis is in a tough spot because he's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? He was gloves on. Why aren't you saying anything? Then he defends himself against charges of being a groomer. Oh, he's too aggressive. Now he's meatball Ron. He's whatever it is. And Donald Trump is just hard to run against. You don't know where it's coming from. That doesn't mean he's not beatable. He was beatable in 2020, and that is still the strongest thing in Joe Biden's back pocket, that he was the one who was able to do that. But to this point about, you know, Donald Trump is getting stronger. I understand there have been a couple polls out that show that. But if you think long term, and I've heard a number of his supporters on air saying it's a good thing that the indictment that works in his favor. Last week, you know, being found liable for sexually harassing E. Jean Carroll and defamation. Those aren't good things. I understand it feeds a narrative. He's a fighter, right? And they're coming for him. But he's also doing these things. And Bill Barr was on earlier today with Martha McCallum, basically saying that he doesn't believe, in terms of the documents case, that it was an accident. It seems like there was some coordination for that. We'll hear what Jack Smith has to say. I have to finish up.
Okay.
That's where it is.
All right. Then, you know what, Joey, the idea that Trump was beatable in 2020, what Joe Biden had was a hide-in-the-basement presidential campaign. He also had COVID, saying, I'm going to be the sensitive, you know, empathic one. And we've since found out that's not the case. You know, 73 million Americans are MAGA degenerates, basically. How does it play out if it were the two of them this 2024?
Anybody is beatable when 48% of the country wouldn't vote for you if their life depended on it. And that's kind of the polarization that we have now. There isn't a Democrat or a liberal that would vote for Donald Trump any more than they would vote for Ron DeSantis, I don't think. But what we have now are Joe Biden's presidency, the years of his presidency. What we have now is a border crisis that everyone watched the administration take years to call a crisis. We have the drawdown in Afghanistan that turned into death unnecessarily. We have what's happening in Ukraine, and could it have been prevented, and what are we going to do about it, and where are we with it? It just keeps going. That's before you get to domestic policies, the price of eggs, the price of energy, the energy policy, things that people that aren't in their core already partisan about are asking themselves, how does this affect me? So if there is 4% or 10% of the country that is undecided, you have to believe that the issues favor Donald Trump. So what Jessica's talking about is the character of Donald Trump in such a gutter right now that those people won't swing for him on issues. And I just don't think that's the case because we see with Joe Biden a host of issues in his own. He may not be getting found guilty for libel, but everyone knows that the Hunter Biden issue doesn't just belong to Hunter Biden. Everyone knows he's been in politics for 50 years.
Judge, just one more point on,
Sure.
on the polling that recently came out. Reuters did a poll, and it was interesting to see that 64% of Democrats want to vote for a candidate that is tougher on the border. And you see none of that coming from Joe Biden at this point, and you have every Republican talking about that. Now, changing our Democrats' vote is a big ask and a big lift, but it's interesting to see that they're interested in that topic, which this
Especially
administration has gone
today.
very far left on.
And I don't see how
All
Donald
right.
Trump
Coming
loses
up-
a primary.
A lot of people agree with you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.